Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. The U.S. is working to maintain a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, which is heading into a complicated second phase. Both President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio are meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister today. Another military strike against Venezuelan drug traffickers. The first time the U.S. military has struck a land target in Venezuela. A viral video, a massive fraud investigation, and now a warning from the FBI. Federal officials say they've already indicted dozens in Minnesota, but the FBI director says what they've uncovered so far could be just the tip of the iceberg. A $50 billion fund for rural health care. The White House provides an update on what the money aims to do and how much each state will get. China's military launches live fire drills around Taiwan, calling the operation a stern warning. Tensions are rising as Taiwan places its own forces on alert. A South Korean e-commerce company will be paying its users for a massive data breach. Coupang has announced more than $1 billion in compensation.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. The shocking scope of alleged fraud in Minnesota continues to come to light. Independent journalist Nick Shirley published an over 40-minute investigative video of daycare and healthcare centers in the state. The video has crossed 100 million views on X. Here's part of the video and reactions from Shirley on Fox News.
Hello, we'd like to ask where the money's going. What do you guys think about the fraud that's taking place here in Minnesota?
I don't think anybody is enabling fraud to happen.
Hold Governor Walz accountable for this.
What was this money spent on? 1.26 million. What was that money spent on? There aren't any kids.
Answer the question. Are there children? There's no children inside this building.
We were able to crack over $110 million in fraud in one day. And that's just the tip. When people say it's the tip of the iceberg, it really is, because there's billions of fraud inside the state of Minnesota right now. Oh, it's so obvious. If you're living in Minnesota, you have to raise your eyebrows and think, what's going on? Literally, if you drive around Minnesota, around Minneapolis, you will see daycare centers, autism centers. You will then see transportation companies that have snow piled up as if they haven't moved in months. And then you also go into buildings where there'll be 20 healthcare companies, 14.
In the video, Shirley visits multiple daycare centers where no kids are in sight. Some have blacked out windows and no visible playgrounds. The centers allegedly received millions of dollars in government funding. A spokesperson for Minnesota Governor Tim Walz says the governor has strengthened oversight, including launching investigations into these specific facilities, one of which was already closed. FBI Director Kash Patel commented on Shirley's videos focusing on alleged fraud in Minnesota. Patel says the FBI surged personnel and investigative resources to Minnesota before the video was shared. Here's more.
Patel says the aim is to dismantle large-scale fraud schemes exploiting federal programs. Federal officials have so far indicted 78 people and convicted 57 individuals in a $250 million fraud scheme in Minnesota. Charges included wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and more. Patel says the FBI believes the cases uncovered so far are just the tip of a very large iceberg. He says the FBI will continue to follow the money and protect the children. The FBI director says many are also being referred to immigration officials for possible deportation proceedings where eligible. Meanwhile, Minnesota Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has also come under scrutiny. Her net worth rose sharply to about $30 million, which is an increase of roughly 35-fold from the year before, and the wealth is largely attributed to assets connected to her husband's firm, Rose Lake Capital.
The One Big Beautiful Bill allocates $50 billion to fund healthcare in rural America. The White House today provides an update on what this money will do. Here's more.
Dr. Mehmet Oz, administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, says the fund will be distributed over 5 years. His agency will be getting $10 billion every fiscal year, and the first year's fund is already given out. Each state will get between $147 million and $281 million in 2026. The fund aims to address structural issues with rural healthcare, such as lower life expectancy. Dr. Oz says the purpose of the fund is not to pay operating expenses, but rather to incentivize innovation. He says, for example, Alaska is exploring drone delivery of prescription drugs, and Alabama is experimenting with robotics during ultrasounds on pregnant women.
A man charged with planting two pipe bombs in Washington, D.C. the night before the January 6th Capitol breach has confessed. That's according to court papers released yesterday. Brian J. Cole Jr. told authorities he felt obligated to, quote, speak up after he started to suspect the 2020 election had been tampered with. Cole was arrested this month. According to the government's court filing, he initially denied placing the bombs outside the Republican and Democratic Party headquarters ahead of the U.S. Capitol breach. But then investigators showed him a surveillance image of what they said was him in a hooded sweatshirt carrying a backpack en route to the bomber that took place. After that, according to the filing, he confessed. Another military strike against Venezuelan drug traffickers. President Trump says the U.S. took out a major facility in the South American country. Here he is speaking to WABC Radio on Friday.
We just knocked out, I don't know if you read or you saw, they have a big plant, a big facility where they send where the ships come from. 2 nights ago, we knocked that out. So we hit them very hard. But drugs are down over 97%. Can you believe it?
The president didn't provide details about the strike. The Trump administration has been targeting drug boats in international waters in recent months. But this would mark the first time the U.S. military has struck a land target in Venezuela. Trump added during the interview that the Venezuelan regime took U.S. oil and sent millions of people from their jails to America. The president recently announced a blockade of sanctioned oil tankers to and from Venezuela and also did not rule out a war with the country. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said today that the U.S. is offering a 15-year security guarantee as part of a proposed peace plan. Though Zelensky said he would prefer a U.S. commitment of up to 50 years to deter Russia from further attempts to seize land by force. On the Russian side, the Kremlin said today that Ukraine should withdraw its troops from the part of Donbass that it still controls if it wants peace. A spokesman said another call between President Trump and Russia's President Putin will happen soon. Zelensky met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago over the weekend. Trump said the talks were getting very close to a deal to end the war in Ukraine.
The two leaders met at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida on Sunday, reporting progress on security guarantees for Ukraine and territorial issues.
Mr. President, have you agreed on the so-called free trade zone on Donbass? How to separate the sites? How to make the separation line? Who will be responsible?
The word agreed is too strong. I would say not agreed, but we're getting closer to an agreement on that, and that's a big issue. Certainly, that's one of the big issues. And
Zelensky said an agreement on security guarantees for Ukraine has been reached, while Trump said they're about 95% there, with European nations expected to play a major role. French President Emmanuel Macron announced a meeting in Paris for early January to finalize those contributions. Trump also spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin before meeting Zelensky, calling the 2-hour conversation productive. And he said he plans to call him again.
President Putin was very generous in his feeling toward Ukraine succeeding, including supplying energy, electricity, and other things at very low prices. So a lot of good things came out of that call today.
The Kremlin has expressed support for Trump's negotiations. Negotiators are also working on shared control of the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, which Trump says could restart soon under a local ceasefire. Despite weekend missile strikes on Kyiv, Trump insists both sides are serious about peace. Zelensky said any peace agreement would have to be approved by Ukraine's parliament or by a referendum. And Trump said he would be willing to speak to lawmakers if that would secure the deal.
The State Department said today the U.S. has made a $2 billion pledge for UN humanitarian aid. The U.S. reduced its aid spending this year, as did Western donors such as Germany, pivoting to increased defense spending. The State Department said the UN needs to consolidate humanitarian functions to reduce bureaucratic overhead, unnecessary duplication, and what it called ideological creep. It said individual UN agencies will need to adapt, shrink, or die. Total U.S. humanitarian contributions to the UN fell to almost $3.5 billion in 2025, equating to almost 15% of the global sum. This was down sharply from around $14 billion the prior year, and a peak of about $17 billion in 2022. The United Nations launched a 2026 aid appeal for $23 billion earlier this month. That's after half the $47 billion sought for 2025, reflecting falling donor support. To discuss President Trump's foreign policy moves of the past year, joining us is Rebecca Grant, Vice President of the Lexington Institute and National Security Analyst. So good afternoon to you, Dr. Grant. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll start with the most current. President Trump brokered an initial peace deal between Israel and Hamas. He's meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister today, and they're looking on to move to the next phase of the plan. What is your review of Trump's handling of the Gaza conflict?
When they announced on October 8th that Israel and Hamas had agreed to a ceasefire and the living hostages and remains would be coming out, it was amazing. And I think something only President Trump could have pulled off. Yes, he really benefited from military pressure by Israel. Of course, the B-2 strikes in Operation Midnight Hammer, crushing Iran's nuclear facilities. But it was nonetheless a masterful negotiation and the product of just intense work and refusal to give up. Okay. That said, a lot of good has now taken place in Gaza, more humanitarian aid going in, but we need to get to the next phase, a true international stabilization force, and then eventually a rebuilding of Gaza. That's taken some time, and as you can see from the meeting with Netanyahu and Trump has to kind of stay in there and keep the pressure on all the players to keep the Gaza plan moving forward.
And just to build on that, Dr. Grant, it's not just this one, right? Far from it. President Trump has brokered multiple peace deals and ceasefires, including between Armenia and Azerbaijan, DRC, and Rwanda, Israel, and Iran. So what are your comments on this? How does this compare to past presidents' efforts?
An incredible flurry of effort. And don't forget India and Pakistan during their flare-up. And one common element here, especially with India and Pakistan, is Trump simply threatens to change the tariffs if the warring sides won't agree. And I think that and his personal stake in all this has been really key to getting these agreements. You know, in the case of India, Pakistan, that was clearly calmed tensions. Armenia and Azerbaijan, wow, you know, we've seen how far back that conflict goes and didn't think that would maybe ever happen. Same thing with the DRC. So some tremendous achievements because Trump was willing to use both the strategic leadership of the U.S. and some of that economic power and willing to put it on the line himself and insist on getting results. So all of these are tremendous accomplishments that do make the world a safer place.
So in your view, Dr. Grant, do you think his tariff policy has played an outsized role during this administration?
Oh, absolutely. You know, he is so comfortable using the tariff weapon. I think more comfortable than a lot of us are. But we've all really learned, too, that even some of our best friends and allies had some pretty steep tariffs and that were unfair to the U.S. So he's done a good job of unmasking that and of showing that the U.S. can use economic policy leverage and get positive results. That's something that really is quite unique to Trump, and he has used it over and over again. One of the positive examples, of course, being undergirding that strong relationship with South Korea and with Japan and getting them to take their alliance, which was started under the Biden years, really to the next level as they oppose China and, of course, North Korea.
And I just want to stay on this topic of ending wars a little bit longer, Dr. Grant. What do you think about Trump's efforts in regards to the Russia-Ukraine war? You know, he thought that it would be one of his easier ones, he said, but it turned out not to be so exactly. He said today, however, peace is closer than ever. What do you think?
He's still optimistic. I tell you, he is not going to stop until he gets that done. I believe he thought that coming into office back in January, he could put together an attractive package for Putin of economic incentives, sanctions relief, investment deals, things that would make Putin or any reasonable person agree to end the war. But Putin has a taste for war. He likes this war, and it is him and him alone, Putin alone, his idea of a revived imperial Russia that is keeping this madness going. So I applaud President Trump for really sticking with it. It does sound to me, especially as we are not hearing too many details about the 20-point plan, I think that says there are very intensive behind-the-scenes negotiations. His strategy is to try what worked for Gaza, that is keeping Witkoff, Kushner, Secretary Rubio, and others at the negotiating table until they pound out a deal. And I must say, President Zelensky has been quite agreeable in recent months, also really trying to get that ceasefire done.
Okay, so another big thing this year, and is still current, the Trump administration escalating pressure on Venezuela, with naval blockade on sanctioned oil, strikes on alleged drug boats. And, President Trump said recently in an interview on Friday with WABC Radio in New York that the U.S. knocked out a Venezuelan facility. So this could be the first land attack, actually, on a facility. Your thoughts on the president's approach to Latin America this year?
Yes, on that attack, we know that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, had briefed a target set several weeks ago now. It sounds to me like this might have been a maritime connected, a lightering facility, something there that's supporting the loading of the drug boats. And just to stay tactical for a moment, we do have incredible, exquisite maritime surveillance, and they know exactly which boats they're hitting and why. But the big change, of course, is making the Western Hemisphere a top priority for the U.S. And the administration has carefully laid out its case that several of the Venezuelan-sponsored cartels are narco-terrorists and an imminent invasion threat. That's a pretty big change in U.S. foreign policy, but it's from that basis that President Trump is using his authority as commander-in-chief to interdict the drug boats. The oil tankers, some of those have been on the sanctions list for a pretty long time, and some of them have a very, very bad history of running oil for Venezuela and for others. And of course, who buys it? That's China. So the final piece in this hemisphere is Trump wants to diminish China's influence in Central and South America so that it's the U.S. that is the leader in our own hemisphere.
Okay, Dr. Grant, I just want to end with this. There's so much that's happened on the foreign policy front, but we've seen big moves from the Trump administration on immigration as well. So some developments being the pause on all immigration applications, like requests for green cards from 19 countries, pausing asylum decisions, carrying out expansive deportation operations domestically. In your view, how have this administration's policies impacted U.S. national security on the immigration front?
It's a net positive. They need to stop and rethink some of the policies. The asylum program was never meant to expand in the way that it has. It had a very narrow focus originally. So I want to see Trump's team go in and really think about what we want to do about asylum claims and about priorities for immigration in this country. Note also, he's really dropped the crossings at the southern border and all encounters nationwide. So I'd say he gets an A on immigration policy, and we'll see what his new set of rules look like in 2026.
Yep, we'll definitely be keeping an eye out for that. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Dr. Grant. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Storms are affecting tens of millions of people. Many post-holiday travelers are facing weather delays and dangers. Shenyun Performing Arts began its U.S. tour over the weekend. A Houston City Council member presented Shenyun with a certificate of recognition. More news after this break. One person is dead and another critically injured after two helicopters crashed mid-air in southern New Jersey yesterday. Only the pilots were on board each aircraft. And video from the scene shows a helicopter spinning rapidly to the ground. Police and fire crews extinguished flames that engulfed one of the helicopters. The mid-air crash happened over Hamilton Municipal Airport. The owner of a cafe near the crash site said the pilots were regulars at the restaurant and would often have breakfast together. He said he and other customers watched the helicopters take off before one began spiraling downward, followed by the other. The Hamilton police chief said the FAA and National Transportation Safety Board will be investigating the crash. Meteorologists say a cold front that's sweeping east across the country is clashing with unseasonably warm air. The result is a string of brutal winter storms. Today, they're pummeling much of the northeastern quadrant of the U.S. Here's a closer look at how the weather is impacting travel.
This is kind of the last hurrah for folks that haven't left already to return home.
Many post-holiday travelers face weather delays and dangers today. Storms spawning along a cold front are affecting tens of millions of people. Much of the Northeast is dealing with severe snow and ice storms.
The ice is our main concern. I know temps are supposed to warm up. Ground temps are still cold.
In the Midwest today, forecasters warn blizzards are the concern. They say snow could meet winds up to 60 miles per hour in some areas. The FAA says Chicago O'Hare Airport had a ground stop yesterday. Oh, shoot! Utilities report more than 100,000 recent power outages in the region. In Iowa,
14 vehicle crash just ahead of my vehicle that's being cleaned up now. Zero visibility.
Some communities, like this one in Illinois, are recovering from tornado damage. Meanwhile, FlightAware reports about 10,000 U.S. flight delays and 800 cancellations yesterday. That follows another rough day for some passengers Saturday.
I just want to make it home to my own bed tonight.
Going with the flow, wherever the wind takes me.
In places across the country, the upside of the winter weather is the joy it's bringing children on holiday breaks.
We're trying to find a good area to do a snowball fight.
Silver prices soared to a record high of $83 per ounce today before settling back to just below $72. The jump marked a 175% increase since the start of the year. In addition to silver, gold prices have risen by more than 66% with a record high of $4,500 per ounce. That's up from just over $2,600 at the beginning of the year. Today, gold hovered at around $4,300 an ounce. Platinum was at $2,100, marking a 137% increase this year. Shenyun Performing Arts has begun performances in the U.S. with shows over the weekend, including cities in California, Connecticut, and Texas. A Houston City Council member was at Shenyun's opening performance over the weekend and presented Shenyun with a certificate of recognition. Let's take a look at some of the audience reactions, which NTD has been covering since 2006 as a media sponsor of Shenyun Performing Arts.
Shenyun Performing Arts gave their first performance in Houston, Texas on December 26 at the Jones Hall for the Performing Arts. Houston City Council member Edward Pollard was among the audience members and was there to present Shenyun with a certificate of recognition. He congratulated them on their 20th anniversary as they embark on their 2026 world tour.
It was an incredible performance for Shenyun to be back in Houston for the 18th year and the 20th year that the performance has been going on around our country. It's a blessing to have it back in Houston, and the performers did an excellent job.
Well, I thought it was a fabulous show, very talented performers dancing with passion and excitement, showing the true richness of China and its heritage.
Shenyun is based in New York, where it was founded in 2006. Their mission is to revive 5,000 years of traditional Chinese culture through classical Chinese dance and music from before communism. Audience members gave their impression of Shenyun's orchestra, which consists of both classical Western and Eastern instruments.
The orchestra was great. I mean, all of the different sounds and the music that they were able to provide while the dancers were performing went perfect. But a big shout out goes to the MCs as well. They really explained what we were watching, the importance and historical history of each dance, and I thought it was just excellent all around.
The music is great. I really enjoy the mix of the Western orchestra as well as the traditional Chinese instruments. So that's really very interesting, very unique for me.
Theatergoers also commented on the spiritual themes present throughout the performance.
It was more than just dancing. It was about us as human beings having traditional values, making sure that we understand our greater purpose, and the dancers really reflected that.
It resonates with sort of our Christian tradition in the United States and the rest of the world, where the power and goodness comes from God and not from the government. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why this isn't shown in China.
Their emotions definitely impact me. I can feel it. Even though wherever our seats are, it just reflects their emotions. I can feel every single one of them and their movements, even though wherever we are. It's very smooth too. It's very elegant. I love it.
Sheng will be performing in Houston until December 30th. NTD News, Houston, Texas.
The Trump administration is tightening the net around Venezuela's oil exports. Why Trump is taking the fight to Venezuela's doorstep. More news after this. Another military strike against Venezuelan drug traffickers. President Trump says the U.S. took out a major facility in the South American country. Here he is speaking to WABC Radio on Friday.
We just knocked out, I don't know if you read or you saw, they have a big plant, a big facility where they send where the ships come from. 2 nights ago, we knocked that out. So we hit them very hard. But drugs are down over 97%. Can you believe it?
The president didn't provide details about the strike. The Trump administration has been targeting drug boats in international waters, but this would mark the first time the U.S. military has struck a land target in Venezuela. Trump added during the interview that the Venezuelan regime sent millions of people from their jails to America. The Trump administration is tightening the net around Venezuela's oil exports. Joining us to discuss his new article for the Epoch Times is Kevin Stocklin, journalist and contributor to the Epoch Times. Okay, Kevin, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. So in your article titled, Why Trump is Taking the Fight to Venezuela's Doorstep, you noted that the Trump administration said Venezuela stole American property. So we can start there. Maybe you can speak to us about what kind of property and the amount that Venezuela took.
Hi, Don. Nice to see you. So typically when a huge reserve is discovered, whether it's in Venezuela or the Middle East, very often countries will contract with Western oil companies to come in and bring the technology, develop the drilling equipment, extracting, processing, etc. And so that was certainly the case in Venezuela going back about a century. And oil majors are saying that the value of what they've brought in terms of equipment and technology and capital expenditures is about $60 billion.
So what has been the impact of that on the U.S. Based on what you just talked about?
Well, on the one hand, Venezuela had been the largest importer of oil into the United States, and they were producing about 20% of what the U.S. imported. And to a very large extent, the refineries that were built, particularly along the Gulf Coast, were designed to handle the kind of heavy sour crude that comes out of places like Venezuela. On the other hand, since 2007, when Venezuela nationalized the U.S. Property, we have developed fracking and become the largest producer of oil. However, the refineries are still largely built to be most efficient processing the kind of oil that's coming out of places like Venezuela.
That Venezuela's governing regime is illegitimate. So talk to us about that. What happened during Venezuela's 2024 presidential election and onwards?
Yeah, well, the communists have been running Venezuela for decades and have really driven the economy into the ground. And they had an election in 2024. All observers believed and reported that the opposition, gentleman Edmundo Gonzalez, had won the election over the current president, Nicolas Maduro. However, Maduro refused to cede power and used the security police that he controls to keep the presidency. And so for this reason, the Trump administration and many other world leaders and observers are saying that his presidency is not legitimate.
So, Kevin, in your article, you highlight that Venezuela is estimated to hold the world's largest oil reserves. What is the significance of that?
Yeah, so that amounts to about 300 billion barrels. It is the largest known reserve of oil, larger than Saudi Arabia, larger than any Middle Eastern country, and about 7 times the reserves of the United States. So Trump very much has a strategy of increasing energy production, particularly in the United States. And this opening up these oil reserves would allow not only the addition of that to production in the region, but also to allow it to go through U.S. refineries, which process this kind of oil much more efficiently than the light crude that comes out of fracking.
And you noted, Kevin, that Venezuela is a country wrecked by socialism. What does that look like for the average Venezuelan? How do they get there?
Yeah, so Venezuela, used to be the richest country in South America and in the top 20 richest countries in the world. Since being taken over by socialism under Hugo Chavez, they have seen their GDP decline by about 75% between 2014 and 2021. They now see about 70% of the country living in poverty. They've had millions of people flee the country as refugees. Hyperinflation is the norm, and many in the country are actually suffering from starvation as well.
And can we talk about China for a moment as well? What role does China play in this situation? How dependent is Venezuela on China?
Absolutely. Well, China currently takes about 80% of the oil exports from Venezuela. So Venezuela is under embargo from the United States. China is obviously violating that embargo. So about 80% of the oil coming out of Venezuela is now going to China. And China is very unhappy with the embargo that the United States has placed on Venezuela for obvious reasons. They have gone so far to say that Venezuela could be the next Vietnam for the United States.
Okay, just final question. What does the U.S. endgame look like for Venezuela?
Well, what Trump seems to be doing, obviously, he's very interested in increasing energy production, but seems to also be reestablishing what's called the Monroe Doctrine. And this was a doctrine that has existed for more than a century in the United States, and it basically establishes that North and South America are key zones of influence for the United States. Initially, it was to keep Europe out of there, but more recently, it appears that China has taken a very strong interest in the region as well. So I think Trump, on the one hand, would certainly like to get the U.S. oil majors repaid their investments that were seized by Venezuela without any compensation. But I think the big picture is not only increasing energy production, but also establishing U.S. sovereignty over the region.
Okay, Kevin, good to talk to you today, and Happy New Year.
Same to you, Don. Thank you.
President Trump says tariffs are creating great wealth and unprecedented national security for the United States. In a social media post on Saturday, he said that the trade deficit has been cut by 60% and mentioned third quarter GDP growth of 4.3%. Trump said the U.S. is respected as a country again. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Radley breaks down what's at play.
Tariffs. My favorite word, tariffs.
President Trump has taken an aggressive approach to tariffs over the past year. And whether you're for or against them, they've created a major change in the global economy. Critics have argued that tariffs on goods fall onto the consumer, but it's not immediately clear that prices on certain tariffed goods have gone up. And the latest Bureau of Labor Statistics report on the annual inflation rate shows that it dropped from 3% to 2.7% last month. Now, President Trump has many reasons behind these tariffs, and one of the main ones is to rebalance unfair trade practices with other countries that have been putting up trade barriers against the U.S. for years, and also to encourage domestic manufacturing. Trump said that these tariffs have already been encouraging trillions of dollars in U.S. investment.
Companies know that if they build in America, there are no tariffs, and that's why they're coming home to the USA in record numbers. They're building factories and plants at levels we haven't seen, AI, automobiles. We're doing what nobody thought was even possible, not even remotely possible. There has never, frankly, been anything like it. 1 year ago, our country was dead. We were absolutely dead. Our country was ready to fail. Totally failed. Now we're the hottest country anywhere in the world, and that's said by every single leader that I've spoken to over the last 5 months.
In that year-end address, President Trump said to the nation that he's sending $1,776 bonus checks to 1.45 million military members. Trump says that the income made from tariffs made it possible.
And the checks are already on the way. Nobody understood that one until about 30 minutes ago. We made a lot more money than anybody thought because of tariffs, and the bill helped us along. Nobody deserves it more than our military, and I say congratulations to everybody. And by the way, we now have record enlistment in our military, and last year we had among the worst recruitment numbers in our military's history. What a difference a year makes.
Now, President Trump also said that he used the threat of tariffs to end certain wars, such as between India and Pakistan, Cambodia and Thailand, and between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, just to name a few. Trump has also used tariffs as part of a separate negotiation with other countries on a range of issues, including on illegal immigration and drug trafficking. He lowered tariffs on China by 10%, for instance, all in exchange for curbing fentanyl precursor chemicals to the U.S. He also placed tariffs on Mexico and Canada to stem the flow of fentanyl, other drugs, and also illegal immigration to the U.S. Now, on the domestic front, Trump said that tariffs could be used to potentially lower or eliminate federal income taxes, pay off the national debt, and send dividend payments worth $2,000 to low and middle-income families next year. The Supreme Court is hearing a case on whether to uphold or reject Trump's tariffs under an emergency law. If it's rejected, it could result in the U.S. having to refund all of the collected tariff money, which now amounts to hundreds of billions of dollars. And Trump has called this case the biggest threat to U.S. national security and could render the nation financially defenseless. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
It's been nearly 40 years since the world watched in fear as disaster struck at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. But with the Russia-Ukraine war raging on, the protection of the infamous nuclear facility remains as vital as ever. NTD's Daniel Monahan reports.
Reactor number 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in present-day Ukraine exploded on April 26, 1986. The blast caused a radioactive fallout, which spewed into the atmosphere. Dozens of people were killed in the immediate aftermath of the disaster, while the long-term death toll from radiation poisoning is believed to number in the thousands. Following the incident, so-called liquidators traveled to Chernobyl from all over the Soviet Union to try to eliminate the consequences and get the plant up and running again.
A few months after the accident, the other reactors were started up again once they'd been cleaned up and checked for safety, and additional safety measures were put in place to prevent, hopefully, another Chernobyl.
Those reactors were gradually shut down over the next 14 years after the accident. The final one to shut down was Unit 3 in the year 2000, which is the one next door to the one that exploded. To keep the plant operational, the damaged reactor was sealed off, and a huge steel and concrete enclosure, which became known as the sarcophagus, was constructed between June to late November 1986. The plant remained operational during the fall of the Soviet Union and Ukraine gaining independence in 1991.
So, of course, this was at times where, it coincided, the Chernobyl incident, roughly with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine as a new country. People needed electricity to maintain the grid, to maintain stability effectively. So it was all important to keep the lights on at this sort of time of political turbulence and change.
However, in October 1991, reactor number 2 became damaged beyond repair after a fire and was taken out of operation. Reactor number 1 was decommissioned in November 1996, but it wasn't until April 25, 2000 that then Ukrainian Prime Minister Viktor Yushchenko confirmed the site would shut. On December 15, 2000, the final reactor number 3 was turned off, shutting down the whole site.
Ukraine was very strongly encouraged by the US and Western Europe to shut the remaining reactors at Chernobyl down, and they were given aid in the form of help to rebuild or make the structure over the damaged reactor stronger.
Between 2010 and 2016, the new safe confinement, a nearly 350 feet high and 850 feet wide metal structure, was built to cover and protect the concrete sarcophagus. However, since the start of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, fighting around nuclear power plants has repeatedly raised fears of a nuclear catastrophe during the 3 years of war. The site was occupied by Russian forces for 35 days, and on February 14th this year, a drone armed with a warhead hit the protective outer shell of the plant,
which punctured a hole in it and started a small fire in the new safe confinement building, but fortunately didn't and probably wasn't designed to get through the original giant concrete structure over the reactor, so it didn't cause a release of radiation or radioactivity.
Kyiv blamed Russia, while the Kremlin denied it was responsible. After the strike, repair work quickly began.
So they've put some specialist workers who have sort of rappelled down the side of the new safe confinement structure to try and put a membrane over the hole. Now that physically helps to cover up the hole. It doesn't help to form a hermetic seal, but at least it stops the weather coming in through the hole.
Scott says ideally the Ukrainians need to accelerate the speed at which they're doing the decommissioning.
But of course, that's made very, very challenging by the fact that they're still, being invaded by a foreign aggressor.
With the sarcophagus still intact, the radiation risk is low. However, Scott feels it's only a matter of time before a new solution for the sarcophagus is needed.
The radioactivity will cause the sarcophagus to continue to degrade, and it is a structure that is really very old now, and just like any old building, it will continue to fall apart until either someone takes it down or it falls down.
On December 5th, the International Atomic Energy Agency released a statement saying that the new safe confinement has lost its primary safety functions, including the confinement capability as a result of the drone strike. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
A South Korean e-commerce company will be paying its users for a massive data breach. Coupang has announced more than $1 billion in compensation. Find out more after this break. The price tag on a data leak for a South Korean e-commerce company is about $1.2 billion. Coupang announced that its nearly 34 million account holders will get company vouchers after a massive data leak. Coupang founder Kim Bom issued a public apology for last month's breach that sparked backlash from its users and lawmakers. Now there's mounting criticism over Coupang providing its compensation to users with vouchers that can only be used on its own services and platforms. South Korea's parliament will hold 2 days of hearings to discuss Coupang starting tomorrow. The New York City subway will be ending the era of its Metro card in January after almost 3 decades of swiping into subway stations. The Metropolitan Transit Authority will no longer sell Metro cards, but they will still be accepting them for now. One Metro New York, or OMNY, will replace the Metro cards as go-to contactless payment system. First introduced in 2019, the MTA says more than 90% of subway and bus trips are now paid with the tap-and-go system. Riders will also be able to purchase a reloadable Omni card for $1, similar to the existing Metro card. The MTA says the change will save at least $20 million annually. And to honor the end of the MetroCard era, the New York City Transit Museum is hosting a farewell exhibit showcasing its decades of service. NTD's Sean Marshall paid a visit to the museum to find out more.
The New York transit system at one time used coins as payment, then decided to upgrade to a magnetic strip card in the mid-90s. But it's going away at the end of the year and being replaced by a card that can be tapped more easily like a credit card with a chip. And the New York Transit Museum has curated a memorial farewell exhibit honoring the life of the MetroCard. If you've ever tried to use the old MetroCard, you would have noticed right away that there is a trick to it. You have to swipe it at just the right speed or you won't be riding on the subway or bus.
The funny thing about MetroCard is that the authority not only introduced this as a new fare medium to replace the token, but had to teach millions of New Yorkers how to use it. And some New Yorkers still are getting the hang of it.
The MTA has managed to make some of their cards have more perceived value by making hard-to-get limited editions that now sell for big bucks on eBay.
And we have an extensive collection of cards here at the New York Transit Museum, so it was a little bit difficult to pick such a small amount, but we've got the first wrappers on a MetroCard, which is Gangstar in 1998. We also have a bunch of other wrappers because they've featured in MetroCards for a long time, and hip-hop was formed in New York, in the Bronx, so why not celebrate that through MetroCard? The first TV show advertised on a MetroCard was Spin City in 1997, and that one is over there. The first athletes on a MetroCard were the New York Rangers in 1994. We've got the first Subway Series MetroCard, which is in 1997. And then there's the Subway Series World Series from 2000. So there's so many things happen in New York City that are worthy of celebration, and a fair amount of those were celebrated on the backs of MetroCards.
There is one marketing idea that never quite made it, the infamous Cardvark.
So one of the things that's very prominent in our exhibit is the Cardvark. When the MTA and New York City Transit Authority were figuring out how to market the MetroCard and encourage New Yorkers to use it because it existed alongside of tokens, they thought of a whole bunch of different marketing ideas to try to encourage people to use it, and one of them was Cardvark.
And while there, don't forget to check out the popular gift shop with its unique Metro-related items. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
New York City's Times Square is preparing for its annual New Year's Eve celebration. The organizers behind the event tested confetti today ahead of this year's ball drop. NTD's Andrew Thomas has more on what people had to say ahead of the countdown to 2026.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year!
In just 2 days, visitors from across the country and the world will gather in Times Square. Together, they'll count down the seconds until midnight and help ring in the new year. Today, the event's organizers held a rehearsal. Visitors and locals alike had more to say about the practice run and what lies ahead in 2026.
It feels great. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, so it's fun to just, be a tourist in my own city sometimes. So I had a good time.
I just felt excited for the new year. It made it real. Just getting through 2025 and just embracing 2026.
I feel great going into 2026. I just turned 26 today, so I'm really looking forward to the new year. I'm very excited.
3, 2, 1.
More than 3,000 pounds of confetti will cascade among 1 million people attending the world-famous Times Square New Year's Eve ball drop, a tradition that dates back to 1907. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
The CCP has deployed air, land, and sea military assets to surround Taiwan as the United States and Japan increase their support for the self-governing island. We have more news after this break. This is NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump discussing the next steps in the Gaza ceasefire plan with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago, and the latest from the president on efforts to end the war in Ukraine. Moscow says Ukraine tried to attack President Putin's residence, possibly trying to kill the Russian leader. The Kremlin is now reconsidering its stance in the peace talks, just 1 day after a major breakthrough in the peace process, and which was announced. The CCP has deployed air, land, and sea military assets to surround Taiwan as the United States and Japan increase their support for the self-governing island. A viral video, a massive fraud investigation, and now a warning from the FBI. Federal officials say they've already indicted dozens in Minnesota, but the FBI director says what they've uncovered so far could just be the tip of the iceberg. The man accused of planting pipe bombs in Washington the night before the January 6, 2021 Capitol breach has confessed. We have the update.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
President Trump sitting down with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at Mar-a-Lago today to discuss the Gaza ceasefire plan and what the president has to say about steps to end the Russia-Ukraine war. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu at the White House. And she's at the North Lawn. Mari, good afternoon. What is the latest?
Don, good afternoon. Yes, that's right. This Mar-a-Lago meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump is coming as the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has mostly held. That truce's first phase began back in October with the signing of the Gaza ceasefire deal just days after the 2-year anniversary of that initial Hamas-led attack on Israel. And this is now Prime Minister Netanyahu's 6th in-person meeting with the president since President Trump took office again back in January. And it comes after Netanyahu met earlier today with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and War Secretary Pete Hegseth in Florida. President Trump says that he and PM Netanyahu have around 5 topics to discuss, with Gaza being its major one, Gaza and its reconstruction, the second phase of that ceasefire deal. And he emphasizes the importance of Operation Midnight Hammer, the taking out of Iran's nuclear facilities this past summer, as a necessary factor in getting that peace deal to happen. And President Trump has this threat for Iran if they try to rebuild their facilities. Take a look.
Now I hear that Iran is trying to build up again, and if they are, we're going to have to knock them down. We'll knock them down. We'll knock the hell out of them, but hopefully that's not happening. I heard Iran wants to make a deal. If they want to make a deal, that's much smarter.
President Trump also says that a pardon for Prime Minister Netanyahu is, quote, on its way, as both leaders tout the Israel-U.S. alliance, with Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that Israel has never seen a better friend in the White House than President Trump. And meanwhile, on a different war that President Trump is trying to help solve, President Trump confirms today that he had a, quote, positive call with Russian President Vladimir Putin concerning Ukraine this morning. And that comes a day after Ukrainian President Zelensky met with President Trump at his Mar-a-Lago estate. Take a look.
I waited till this morning because it was pretty late by the time we finished, like 2:30 in Russia, 2:30 in the morning. And we had a very good talk. We spoke at 8 o'clock in the morning hour time. And it was a very productive talk. I mean, we have a few very thorny issues, as you can imagine. He knows about thorny issues probably better than anybody in the world, but it's working out. We have a couple of issues that we're going to get resolved, hopefully, and if we get them resolved, you're going to have peace.
President Trump also says that in that call, Russian President Putin alleges that Ukraine launched a drone on one of his residences, which is a claim that Ukraine and Ukrainian President Zelensky has since denied. Don, back to you.
All right, Mari, thank you very much. To discuss President Trump's meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today, we're joined by David Wormser, Senior Analyst for Middle East Affairs at the Center for Security Policy. David, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. And as you just heard, the Gaza peace plan is one of 5 topics, a major one at that. So I want to ask you, what needs to happen before moving on to the next phase of the peace plan, which is disarming of Hamas and demilitarization of Gaza?
Well, the first thing that has to happen is phase 1 has to end, and it will end only really when the last Israeli hostage, unfortunately a deceased hostage, is returned home. And I think that was part of the conversations today. Prime Minister Netanyahu brought with him the mother of that deceased hostage. So clearly, and the president's team did meet with him. So this is very clearly a major issue. This is really a very major issue that the Israelis have to deal with, and they can't give up on that. Once it moves to the second phase, the first thing the Israelis are focused on then will be what was promised by President Trump and Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, together. They committed in October, as part of this deal, that it would result immediately in phase two, would result in the disarming and disempowering of Hamas, which for Israel is critical. Gaza is where this war started. It was from Gaza that the war on Israel was launched by Hamas. So to leave Gaza in the hands of Hamas armed is simply starting the countdown for the next war, which Israel has vowed won't let happen. So really that's the first thing that has to happen now.
Okay, David, can I ask you, what does disarming Hamas look like exactly?
Well, in terms of result or in terms of way to do it, let me start with the way to do it. The way to do it, the preferable way was that Hamas committed to this 20-point plan. And this 20-point plan very clearly says they have to disarm from their weapons. So the first way would be diplomatic, that they just give in, and that the Turks and Qataris, who are really these are proxies now of Turkey and Qatar, Hamas, they need to disarm. But Hamas now makes it absolutely clear they're not going to do that voluntarily. And Turkey and Qatar are trying to find ways to keep them alive and armed. At least on a lower level. So that really leaves the question, can you just leave them in place? And Israel moves ahead with the 60% or so of Gaza that is under Israeli control and being cleaned out of all the weapons, and you just leave them there to wither on the vine? I think that's probably what the president wants, thinking that eventually the temptations to the Gazans of a better future will overpower the government, and they'll give in and they'll fall and they'll disarm or leave or whatever. But the Israelis don't want them to be there, because any day that can be another attack, and it can also undermine Israel's very existence in Gaza. So there's really a very difficult and complicated situation there. In terms of end result, the Israelis are very clear. No weapons, because any weapon terrorizes the Palestinian population, and the Palestinian population therefore becomes hostage to this Hamas leadership, even if they only have guns. And then they essentially live like a parasite off that population, skimming its money and ruling, and then you can't disarm them anymore. You can't go for the tunnels. You can't effectively disarm them. So really, the only real result is a clean out completely of all weapons.
Okay, David, let me ask you about governance, because I think it's related to disarmament as well. It's all intertwined. So the second phase involves governance by a Palestinian technocratic apolitical committee, and it's going to be under Board of Peace surveillance. Any concerns you have from the Israeli side? Would there be any worries about handling over authority to Gaza to Palestinian bodies?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Israelis want an international body overseeing this, and international forces seeing this. Yes, there could be some sort of a Palestinian self-management structure there, but this technocratic structure, the Israelis would want a veto over any single person serving in it, because they are pretty certain that Hamas will just shed its uniform, put on a civilian suit, and say, we are a technocratic government. And it's still Hamas, but with a suit rather than a uniform. But the guns will still be there, and they'll hide the tunnels, they'll hide where stuff is in the tunnels, and then Israel basically just sits there for 2 years and Hamas is back. So a technocratic government is not what Israel's after. It's after a body that is international, with Palestinians involved with it, that have been vetted carefully not to have been part of Hamas.
So, David, when President Trump spoke to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reporters before the meeting, the topic of Iran came up. And the news is that the Iranian president says Iran is in a full-fledged war with the U.S., Europe, and Israel. What does he mean by that, the Iranian president?
Well, what he means is that he sees hostility on every front, especially to their desire to have missiles and nuclear program, where the Europeans, weak as they may be on many issues, are actually standing their ground to mostly on the issue of Iran's nuclear program. So Iran is defining any opposition to its nuclear program, which is already proven to have been military. It defines it as a hostile act, and that's where this concept of war comes from. The president was very interesting today because until now he's essentially limited the support for Israel on striking Iran based on the nuclear program and the rebuilding of the nuclear program. Today, President Trump was quite clear that he supports Israel also on the issue of missiles. And that is a very big change, because we know that as much as the nuclear program is still largely paralyzed in Iran, the missile program is galloping ahead, potentially with some other non-conventional weapon warheads on them. And that means that we may be getting closer to a resumption of that conflict.
Okay, can you go a little bit deeper on that, President Trump's position on this missile issue?
Well, sure. Up until now, the United States has blocked the missiles, but under the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, as it was called, many of the restrictions on the missile program expired. And President Trump, while he opposed the JCPOA, he hasn't made the missile issue the critical issue of war, not war, in Iran. He's focused only on the nuclear. But lately we've had these reports that Iran is building missiles at the rate it was building before the war last summer, that its arsenal is reaching the levels that it was at the beginning of last summer. And moreover, in the last 2 days, we've gotten reports, Western intelligence agencies are picking up that they may be wetting it to chemical and biological warheads. For Israel, that's always been a red line, the missiles, specifically the launchers, because you can only shoot as many missiles at a time as you have launchers. But now with this non-conventional threat being put on these these missiles, that clearly begins to head right straight toward an Israeli red line. What's so interesting is the president today very explicitly included the missiles in a red line as well. So he has now aligned almost 100% with Israel's position on this.
Okay, David, just one final question. Can you describe for us what is Iran's actual military capability as of right now?
Well, its military capability is still largely paralyzed. It has no real air defense. It's trying to rebuild it, but it's rebuilding it with the same equipment, ultimately, that Israel destroyed. The only change is the Chinese stuff, and there's some Chinese stuff coming in, which may be higher quality, and it may worry the Israelis, but it's not yet material in terms of being able to shut down Israel's dominance of Iran's airspace. The missiles, Iran is galloping ahead with missiles. It's building many hundreds rapidly, but it's not as fast building launchers. And that's the key measure for Israel, because it can only shoot down so many missiles at a time. So what's really the red line for Israel is how many missiles can be shot at a time. And when more launchers are built, that of course threatens Israel more and more. But the unconventional warheads being reported to be put on these missiles, for Israel, any non-conventional warhead is obviously something that will trigger their response. And chemical and biological are certainly non-conventional in that sense.
Okay, David, really great insight today. Thank you so much for speaking with us, and Happy New Year to you.
You too. Happy New Year.
Moscow says Ukraine attacked President Putin's residence in Russia overnight, trying to kill the Russian leader using over 90 drones. The Kremlin now warns that its position in the peace talks might change just one day after news broke that most parts of a possible peace deal were mostly agreed on. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the story.
We've done very well. We've had discussions on just about every subject.
President Trump meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Florida on Sunday. The two praised the progress made in the peace talks, with Zelensky saying most parts of a possible peace deal are almost completely agreed on.
We have great achievements, 20-point peace plan, 90% agreed, and U.S.-Ukraine security guarantees, 100% agreed. U.S.-Europe-Ukraine security guarantees, almost agreed. Military dimension, 100% agreed.
But now on Monday, this peace progress might take a strong hit. Russia says its position in the negotiations will be reviewed because Ukraine tried to attack President Putin's residence in Russia overnight.
Given the complete degeneration of the criminal Kiev regime, which has shifted to a policy of state terrorism, Russia's negotiating position will be reconsidered.
According to the Kremlin, Ukraine aimed at Putin's residence near St. Petersburg using 91 long-range drones. It's not clear yet if Putin was in the residence at the time of the attack. Zelensky denies the claims of an attack on Putin's residence, calling it yet another lie from Russia.
Yesterday we had a meeting with Trump, and it's clear that for the Russians it's a failure if we don't have a scandal with America. If we have progress, it's a failure for them.
He added that Russia lies about an alleged Ukrainian attack to undermine the peace talks. The Kremlin now warning it will retaliate, saying targets have already been chosen. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
The Chinese Communist Party has launched a two-day large-scale military drill surrounding the island of Taiwan. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has the details of the ongoing military tensions.
Taiwan has placed its forces on alert and deployed fighters in response to the CCP's military encirclement of the island. At least 14 PLA warships have been detected around Taiwan.
Because we must take appropriate measures under the premise of ensuring our national security and sovereignty, as this confrontation continues to escalate, the risk of conflict between the two sides will only continue to accumulate.
The Chinese Communist Party called the military exercises a stern warning to separatist and external interference forces.
Any attempt to resolve differences or disputes through coercion is unacceptable. Recent experiences have shown that the CCP is continuously increasing the pressure it exerts on us.
NTD spoke with retired U.S. Marine Colonel Newsroom, a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy with decades of experience in the Indo-Pacific.
So what they're going to say, and what they are saying as well, because Prime Minister Takaichi of Japan said Japan might actually care about Taiwan. We're so angry, we have to do these things. And then they will say, well, the Americans, they're going to sell the Taiwanese more weapons, so therefore we're going to do this. But the Americans have been selling Taiwan and giving Taiwan weapons for a long time. So this is all just an excuse to allow them to hold an exercise that pushes them towards their goal.
According to Colonel Newsroom, these military drills are meant to keep Taiwanese allies from coming to the defense of the island in the case of a potential invasion.
Chinese are putting a lot of effort this time to operations east of the island of Formosa, east of Taiwan, and that's where the help is going to come from. Additionally, they have really tightened up the coverage of the west side, and particularly main civilian ports. And the idea is to really tighten this noose around Taiwan and not just practice, but rehearse for the day that comes when they're going to say, this is it.
For Colonel Newsroom, one of the key indicators that Beijing will be looking at in order to decide whether or not to invade Taiwan will be the political climate in Washington, D.C.
I think one thing that the Chinese watch very closely is the state of affairs in Washington, D.C. Is there a lot of fighting going on within Washington or in America in the political class? Is the society unified or is it being torn apart? Do you have half of the country, or at least half of the political class, that thinks the current administration is Lucifer incarnate?
The CCP's military drills will last for 2 days, and it is expected that on Tuesday we will see live fire drills around Taiwan. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.